Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on UppTalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say UppTalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you are new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
Without any further ado, I think we can get going. Puff. Since you guys already know Workday basics, we'll not spend any time on that. We'll quickly jump into Workday reporting, which in itself is a very big topic, right? It will not spend any time on any other activities and will quickly get going. Let's start with the reporting basics. Can you guys see my screen? Perfect. Alright, let's start with reporting basics. We'll talk about the different types of reports that Workday has. We'll look at how to access those reports and then we'll jump into some of the reporting core concepts and we'll talk about creating reports. Workday has two types of reports, right? The first one are the standard reports. What are standard reports? These are basically the Workday delivered reports, right? When you create your basic tenant, your foundation tenant, and you start with your configuration, these standard reports are loaded as part of your Workday reporting inventory, right? These are part of your Workday product, right? These are all modifications to these reports, all enhancements, all changes, all updates. They are all handled by Workday themselves, right? Let's quickly log into the tenant and see how the standard report looks. We'll be spending a significant amount of our time in the tenant that we understand the concepts. Now, how can I check these standard reports in the tenant? We have this report which is called Workday Standard Reports. I can go to this report and this will basically list out all the standard reports that Workday delivers. Now, you may not have access to all of these reports based on security settings, right? For example, I'm a, let's say, compensation consultant. I probably would only have access to compensation related reports, right? But still, when I run this report, I'll be able to list out all the reports that Workday provides in all the categories. Now, how do I see these reports? I can search for a specific reporting category. For example, I want to search for, let's say, recruiting. I can search for a specific reporting category and then I can list out all the reports that are part of that category. Alright, I see that there are 99 Workday delivered reports that are part of a recruiting module or the recruiting functionality. This report lists out a brief description of each report. This is the report name. It lists out a brief description of the report. It tells me what type of report this is, and we'll talk about this in just a bit. And then it also says whether the report can be scheduled right to run in the background, maybe run on a recurring basis, maybe daily or weekly. And I want to share this report with specific users. We can do that. What this also identifies is which domain this report is part of, right? This is what will give me access to this report. If I'm part of this particular domain, if I have access to this domain, then of course I can view this report, I can run this report, and I can get data for that report. Now I can copy this report and run it in a new tenant or new window if I want to. And if I have access, I'll also be able to run it from here. I can directly run the report from here if I have the report access. I can go to the related actions from here, and if I have access, I'll have the option to run the report from here. Here it is. I can go to standard report and run. And if I don't have access to certain report, I'll not have the option to run it. Alright. Now, alternatively, I want to list out all the standard reports in the tenant. What I can do is I can go back to my selection screen, and either I can select all the report categories. I can come in here. I can select all the report categories, right? And there are some 2021, and then I can click, right? And this would give me all the reports across all the report categories that Workday offers. Alternatively, what I can also do is instead of having to manually select each of these categories one by one, what I can also do is I can come in here. I can basically unselect all of these, right? And I can run this as blank. Even if I run it without selecting any option, it basically gives me the full list. Alright. This may take a while. There are 4820 Workday delivered reports in this tenant across various report categories. Now some of these categories could be active. Maybe your tenant doesn't even use some of these categories. For example, academic advising. Now, this is part of Workday student module. Now, if your client doesn't have student module, of course, you will not have access to any of these reports, right? But as I mentioned, it will still list out all the reports in the tenant. That is Workday standard reports. As I mentioned, this is part of your Workday reporting inventory. Now these reports can be of two types. We have a report writer, and then we have Espresso. We have two types of reports. We have reports of type report writer, and then we have reports of type Espresso. What are these reports? If you look at each report, it basically identifies whether that report is of type report writer or if that type report is of type Espresso. Now, what is the difference? As far as running these reports goes, there's no difference. Let me, for example, select staffing. As far as running these reports goes, there's no difference. If I have access to a report, I would be able to run it from here or basically search for that report and run it. Let me run a report of type report writer and also find some report of type Espresso. These are all report writer. This is an Espresso report. I don't have access to it. I think there is one Espresso report in Composition that I'll have access to. Let's look at this report. Right now, this is an Espresso report. What I'll do is open a duplicate tab. And I'll run it from here. The report is allowance plan. Right. This is that report. And I'll select any allowance plan. Let's take this allowance. And now, what is the difference between a report of type report writer and a report of type Espresso? Now the difference is if I take any report, writer report write, I can basically go ahead and copy it and create a custom report for myself. What is a custom report? Custom reports are basically reports that you create for your tenant. When you're dealing with reporting as a consultant, you would be creating custom reports, right? You would be creating custom reports. You will be responsible for updating them, changing them, enhancing them based on your requirements. Custom reports are maintained by customers. They supplement the delivered reports. And we'll see how these custom reports are created. All custom reports that we create in the tenant write, they are of type report writer. We create custom reports using this technology called report writer. We cannot create any Espresso reports in our tenant. Right? Espresso reports are created using Workday's own proprietary language technology called Espresso, and we don't have any access to it. Now, why is it important? Reason it is important is because, as I mentioned, when a report is of type report writer, I can basically go ahead and copy it and create a custom version of it. We cannot go ahead and edit, modify any standard reports ourselves. All we can do is, if the report is of type report writer, I can go ahead and copy it and then maintain a local version of that report, basically a custom version. However, if a report is of type Espresso, when I go to the related actions, if you see, this is not giving me the related actions of the report. Right? These are the related actions of this specific allowance plan. And basically, we cannot see how this Espresso report has been created. And because all custom reports are of type report writer, of course, we cannot go ahead and copy them. Right. Espresso reports developed and maintained in Workday's developer language, which is Espresso, which means we cannot see the code, we cannot see the logic of how that report has been created. Right? And Workday basically uses it for creating those complex reports which have complex layouts. For example, in this case, I want to see the details of this allowance plan. Right? And there are grids, there are many other tabs. All these types of reports which have these grid layouts, which have complex requirements, statutory requirements, they are mostly developed by Workday in terms of the Espresso. Alright, now how do we copy a custom report? We'll quickly go ahead and look at that in a bit. Any questions here? No, I don't know. Is there? We actually cannot copy any espresso report. It's only the custom report. Modify the report or modifying this. No, we cannot. No standard report can be modified, right? All you can do is you can go ahead and copy a report, write a report, and then you can go ahead and modify it. I want to, let's say, use this report maybe, and why would you copy a standard report? Maybe your client says, this report is perfectly fine for me, but can you also add the position here, right? I also want to see the detail of position, details of an employee. Of course, in that case, you cannot go ahead and directly modify this report. But what you do is, instead of creating a custom report from scratch, you'll instead go ahead and copy this report. Right. This is what we'll do. You'll come in here, go to the related actions of the standard report. Why do you see do not use? What Workday does is, if it has to basically retire some functionality, some report, it will mark it as do not use. And most probably there would be a different version of this report available. Let's say Workday has come up with a better version of this report. It will mark the older version as do not use. Right. And then that report is still available to you for the next few releases. And then ultimately that version, the older version, is retired. And that's why you see do not use. But you can still, if you want, you can use it, you can access it. Workday will not stop you from doing that. Let's say I want to add a new field. Right. I can go to the standard report. I can go ahead and copy it. Right. I can give a different name if I want to. This is the default name that Workday adds. The name of the standard report plus hyphen with a copy. I want to give it a different name. I'll call it. Right. This is my report. I can make whatever modifications I want. And once those modifications are done, we'll click on. And now my standard report has been copied to a custom report. When I go to the details, I see that this is no longer a standard report. The tenant is slow. This is now the custom report that I've created. Right. What happened to the standard report? It's still there. Right. I can still go ahead and access and run that standard report. That is a quick background on the type of reports that Workday creates. Now Workday. All Workday inventory or Workday reporting is based on something called a self-service modeling. Right. Now, some of the technologies, they have this concept wherein there is a central reporting team. Right. Let's say I'm an HR administrator and I need access to some data. I'll send the request to the central reporting team. They'll run the report for me. They'll extract the data for me and then they'll share those with me. Workday reporting works a bit different. It is based on the self-service model versus end-user delivery model, which means as a reporting consultant, your task is to only create reports or modify reports based on your end-user requirements. And then You'll share access to those reports to the respective users who need access to it. Maybe certain reports should be accessible to only managers, and certain reports should be accessible to your composition team. Certain who needs access to that report, you'll share access to those reports with them. And once you've shared those accesses, they'll be able to run that report on demand whenever they want it. Right. It's based on this self-service model. You create custom reports, and then those reports can be either accessed by you if you are the persons who need to access them, or the respective third or the respective users. All right. And these reports can be accessed from your homepage, from your favorites, from your Workday search. I can add these reports on the homepage. Right. These reports can be added as a worklet as an application under View All Apps. This is where I can go ahead and add those reports. And some of these, if you see, there's some report someone has created. Right. Or I can search for that report. What is the report name? Rahel. Right. I can also search for those reports. And I can also go ahead and add them as my favorites. As I mentioned, the technology that Workday uses or that we use for accessing any custom report is the report writer technology. Right? What is the technology? It doesn't matter, right? We are not concerned. This is what Workday calls it. Once you have run a report, that report can then be downloaded. If I run a report and if I have access, all right, then I can go ahead and export this report to Excel. And then I can go ahead and download it. Now, what are custom reports? As I mentioned, custom reports are of type report writer. Right? Now, there are different ways in which custom reports can be created. The first option is you can go ahead and copy a custom report. Right. Copy a standard report to create your own custom reports. Now, some custom reports are also available from Workday or Workday partners. Right. And maybe there's some report that Workday has developed or one of the Workday partners have developed. Maybe KPMG has created some report. Now, these reports are also accessible. These are not standard reports per se, but then these can accessible through Workday's configuration packages. And then finally, you can create custom reports directly in the tenant. How are these custom reports created? We'll look at that in the next few slides. All right. Now there are different types of custom reports that can be created. Let me go in here. This custom report, if I click on the report name, if you see, this is a custom report of type advanced. Right? Similarly, you can create different types of custom reports. What is the difference? The type of the report basically determines the layout of that report. Now, what do I mean by layout of that report? We'll have a look at that. Let's say I want to create a custom report. Right? I would come in here. I would go to this task called Create Custom Report. Now, this is when I want to create a custom report from scratch, right? Not through copying a standard report. I'll come to the task Create Custom Report. And this is where I'll select the type of the report. Right. There are different types of custom reports that can be created. Some are relatively easy. Some are pretty complex and advanced reports, right? And we'll not be talking about those reports at all at least in this class. The first type of custom report that you can create is a simple report. Now, for any practical purposes, we don't create a simple report in the tenant. Let's look at this pop-up. If you look at the second paragraph, it says an advanced report. Why do we not create a simple report? That's why I'm coming to that. If you look at the second paragraph, it says an advanced report provides all the features of a simple report plus provides more advanced features. All attributes or all features that a simple report delivers. An advanced report delivers basically all of those. Plus, it gives you more advanced features. For example, you want to use subfilters in your report. Now we'll talk about what are subfilters, what are worklets. We'll look at all of those options. None of those options are available in a simple report. You want to access data from multiple sources when creating a report. A simple report doesn't do that. For example, if you see I have report type as simple here, and this is what I get to see. These are the options I have. The moment I select advanced as the report type, right, I have some additional options enabled. An advanced report can be enabled as a web service. What is a web service? A web service can be used in your integration. Maybe you want to send data from Workday to a third-party system. Now you would use, or you can use reports for that. But then if the report is of type simple, that cannot be done.
Right.
Simple report. Let me for a quick, we'll look at the difference in a bit more detail. But for any practical purposes, for any business requirements, usually simple reports doesn't give us those options to be able to deliver those business requirements. That's why I've been in Workday career for 6+ years now, and I have never created a simple report because it just doesn't give us the functionality, the features. That's why we don't create a simple report. Usually, if you're a beginner, you are just learning, you'll probably create one or two for your training. That is a simple report. An advanced report, as I mentioned, it provides all the features of a simple report. Plus, it gives you more advanced options. You can access data from multiple sources. We'll look at that. What do we mean by accessing data from multiple sources? You can create headers, you can create subtotals, you can create charts, you can create worklets, you can create web services. All of these options are enabled through an advanced report, which, as I mentioned, is not possible through a simple report. Then we have some other report type as matrix reports. What are matrix reports? Matrix reports are used for Workday's advanced analytics. It is basically the foundation of Workday's advanced analytics. It basically allows you to group your data. Now, what do I mean by grouping your data? For example, when we looked at that custom report that we created, what was it? active employee details, right? If you see, this is basically giving us detailed data, right? When I run this report, it gives me, based on the number of employees in my tenant, it gives me one row of data for each employee, and it's giving me some 6,000 odd rows. An advanced report basically gives me detailed data, right? I want to see the worker's location. I want to see their management level, maybe their position, maybe their job details, on and forth. I would go ahead and create an advanced report. But let's say I want to know the number of employees in each location, right? And I want to know the number of employees in different management level. I'm not much interested in getting the detail of each of those employees. I want to get a summarized output. I want to know how many employees are of level manager, how many employees are of type vice president, director, and on and forth. When I need those summarized values, right, that's when I use a matrix report, right? Which is usually the case for your executive reporting, right? For example, your executives, they're not really interested in checking these details for 6,000 workers. They're interested in those high level numbers. They will probably want to know how many employees are there in different locations and how can we optimize them. How many employees are there in different management levels, and if there is an issue somewhere. Your matrix reports, they allow you to summarize your data. They allow you to group your data. You can get data values, for example, the average salary of your managers versus your senior managers, and on and forth. Those are the kind of summarized values that your matrix report delivers. All right. Trending reports are similar to matrix reports. The difference is, just give me a second. The difference is trending reports, they are similar to matrix reports. The difference is they have a time period element. What is the time period element? I want to know the attrition trend in my organization. I want to know the headcount in my organization over the last 6 months. While a matrix report gives me data, it gives me data as of right now. I can see what is the number of employees in different locations in my organization as of today. With trending reports, I can see a trend. For example, how many employees are joining versus leaving, and the overall headcount in my organization over the last 2 years. I want to see that trend, that attrition trend, the headcount trend, some of the common examples for which your trending reports are created. It's used for those trending analysis. But then there are very similar to a matrix report. If you know a matrix report, then you know trending reports. It's just using a separate business object. That's all. There are a few other report types. For example, we have search reports. Now, what are search reports? It would be easy for me to show this in the tenant. Let me search for a report. And the report is called Find Workers. This is a Workday delivered report. This is a Workday delivered report. Let me run it. Now, if you see, the layout of this report looks a bit different. Now, this is called a search report. Now, what is the search report? On the left-hand side, it has these faceted searches. If you see, it is overall. It is giving me 900 records which is basically the same number I saw with my active employee details that report as well. But then here the layout is a bit different. And also on the left-hand side, what I see is these faceted search options. Now, out of these 6,000 overall count, maybe I only want to see employees who are in the age group 31 to 40. And I see there are 274 employees in this group. When I select here now, it will only give me those 274 employees. Right? This is called a search report. Now it's giving me all employees in this list. And within these 274 employees, right? Maybe I want to see employees who are male. I see out of these 274. The moment you select a particular facet, everything else changes. The reason I get 153 here is because I have selected the age group 31 to 40, which has 274 employees. And now it is telling me out of these 274, 153 are male and 98 are female. I can see who are those 4 employees who are not willing to put the score. Right, and it gives me those 4 workers. Right, and then I want to see what are their employee types. I can come in here. And out of those 4 workers, 2 are regular, 1 is full-time, and maybe 1 is a contingent worker. This is a search report. Right? These are again very similar to your advanced reports with an additional option to add a faceted search. Alright, this is a search report. Displays again. It displays all results based on the values that you select with your facet filters. These left-hand side, these are called your facet filters. Right? I can clear everything and then it takes me back to that original number. That is your search reports. Now, there are a few other report types as well. Some of these are used in certain modules. For example, we have something called transposed reports, wherein you can basically see data by in terms of adding certain headers and certain footers. These are basically used in talent module. What it basically does is it interchanges your rows and corresponding columns on the report. All right, let me see if I can think of some transposed report. There's one report which can allow you to see all custom reports in your tenant. And the report is all custom reports. We spoke about work-based standard reports, the report that allows you to see all standard reports in your tenant. Similarly, if you want to see all custom reports in your tenant, this is the report. The reason I'm going here is because I'm looking for some report that has been created which is of type transposed. I can quickly run it and show it to you. Let's see if there are some transposed reports available. Let's see. Let me open this in a new tab. Will not go into the technical details of this report type. But I want to quickly show you again, if there is data, how this report looks. Let me open some other cats. Pretty slow. Let's see if there's some other report also available that I can quickly run. I'm just running it. I'm not sure if there's any data. There's no data. This is how, if you see, the layout of this report is a bit different. Right. The transposed report, it allows you to actually place certain labels. It allows you to place certain values. Usually, how would an advanced report look? You'll see the employee name in column 1. You'll see the employee date of birth in column 2. Similarly, for second employee who gets added to row number 2, you'll see employee name, the date of birth. Right? That's how you see each employee data in a separate row and all of his details in separate columns. Here we are actually, if you see it, transposing those rows and columns. Each employee details show up in a single column. Right? This is what I meant when I said you can basically interchange your rows and columns. Of course, this is why I mentioned some of these reports are relevant for certain functional modules. Now, only showing employee details using this report doesn't make any sense. This actually, even though this is possible and someone has created this report, this doesn't add any value here. Right? Mostly these kinds of reports are used in talent module. Then we have inbox reports again. These reports are used in talent modules. These are your grid reports, your matrix reports, or matrix box reports. For example, you want to plot all of your employees, maybe all employees in your supervisory org based on their performance versus potential. Right. Maybe you use 3-point rating scale, excellent, good and poor in terms of your performance. And maybe in terms of your potential, again, you use 3-point rating scale, high potential, average potential, and needs improvement. Now, when you create a grid, your employees will be plotted across this grid. This becomes your 3 by 3 report. You can create inbox report. The number of boxes is based on the number of dimensions you're using. Again, as I mentioned, this makes more sense for your talent reporting, wherein you want to see all employees based on their performance versus potential. Again, let me see if I can. Performance. Talent matrix. Let's run this. These are all your end-by-end reports. I want to go to my organizations. I'm going to see this has created that grid, right? The number of boxes is based on the grid components. Here I have performance, and there are three performance metrics that I'm using: exceeds, meets below. And then there are three potential metrics I'm using. Now, if your talent review has been done, your performance review has been done based on their potential versus performance rating. Workday would automatically place your employees in these boxes. Right. This is an inbox report. Specifically, this is a 9-box report, right? 3 by 3. Once again, if I want, I can go ahead and copy this report and create my own custom version. But we'll not go and do that. That is an inbox report. Finally, we have composite reports. Now composite reports are created when you want to design advanced layout. As the name suggests, a composite report is a combination report wherein you can use one or multiple sub-reports. Basically, what you do is you first create a matrix report and then you join your data. You use multiple matrix reports and club them using composite reports. Right. And then you can, for example, do advanced formatting. You can get data from multiple time periods and you have quite a few advanced options. Again, we'll not look at composite reports in this session or in this training. But then this is a report type available. Any questions? Now we'll look at some of these reports in detail and we'll see how these reports are created. This is just a very high level description of what these various reports are. Just to confirm, only in the composite, one, we can have multiple data sources. For all the others, we have just a single data. Now, what are the ways? Let's do a quick activity. As I mentioned, we can copy a standard report and we have already done that. I can go ahead and copy a standard report and then I can go ahead and create my own custom version and I can go ahead and modify it. Of course, how do we modify a report? That is something we'll go ahead and have a look. The second option is, obviously, I have copied that standard report, right? And the reason I've copied it is because the standard report doesn't give me all the options and I have probably added a few more columns. I have deleted some columns. I have changed the filter criteria and on and forth. Now, because I've copied the standard report and now I want users to use the copied version. I don't want users to use the standard report, but then if someone has access to it, user would be able to find that report. What I can do is I can hide those standard reports. There's this task called hide, Workday delivered reports. I can come in here and hide any reports that I don't want users to access. Either because I've created a custom version of it, or maybe I don't want my users to access it. For whatever reasons, I can come in here, I can select any reports, and then I can basically hide them. What do I mean? I can hide them. Now, even if I have access to this report, I'll not be able to search it. Right when I search for this report, Workday would not give me any results. If I, for example, search for this report, view internal career site, Workday would not give me any results. Madan, you mentioned that, like if you search for a standard report, you show you the list of all the reports, even if you don't have access to it, right? That report, which is Workday standard reports, that report is not accessible to everyone. Only if you are a report writer, you have access to this report. When I say you can hide standard reports, I'm saying hide standard reports from your end users. You as a report writer, you as a report administrator can still go ahead and look at them, see them, add them, remove them because you have those enhanced accesses. Right? But still you would not be able to search for them from your. For example, if I search for view internal career site, Workday doesn't give me that report. Right? It doesn't give me this report, which is view internal career. But then if I go to Workday standard reports and select the right report category, I'll still be able to see it. Right? But then, as I mentioned, this report is not accessible to everyone. It's only accessible to your reporting administrators, your report writers. Make sense? When you go ahead, and the purpose you'll hide a standard report is to eliminate confusion for your end users. Because if your end users see that there are two versions of the same report, they'll not know which report to use. It eliminates confusion for your end users when you have created a custom report. Right, and that custom report should be run instead of the standard report. Right, what happens? It is no longer available in your search results. In your menus, all those options are disabled for your end users. Now, there's one more way for creating your reports, and that is called contextual reporting. For example, let's say I am in a work profile and I want to create, I'm probably looking at some data. Right? Maybe I'm looking at some composition data, some absence data, benefits data, or some other information. Right? And I don't know what is or how this data is being derived. Right? I don't know what is the business object. I don't know what is the data source. I don't have those details, but I need to build a report. What I can do is I can go ahead and create a report. Now, this contextual reporting is not available for every object and every screen, but wherever it is available, it is very helpful. What I can do is I can go to the related actions, and then I have this option called reports. Now here, if you see, I don't have the contextual reporting option. What I'll do is if I go to reporting, I have a few options here. I can, of course, look at the business object details. We'll talk about what are these business object details later, but what we are interested right now are these three options. without even knowing the business object, the data source, or how this report has to be created or what fields are involved. I can directly create a custom report from here. The advantage is it gives me that head start. When I select this option, Create Custom Report from here, Workday would automatically determine the business object, the data source. It will determine what fields have to be included or what fields are available for inclusion, and it will present me those screens, and I can go ahead and create a report from here. It allows me to create a report based on the context of the screen that or the context of the object that I have currently opened. Right, I can also see all the related reports. What related reports? Reports which are related to the object. When I say object, the object here is the worker, right? I'm looking at a worker details, specific worker details, in this case Logan McNeil. Right, and then what I can also do is I can see all the fields and values. Now when I click here, this will take a lot of time to run. I'll not click here. Let me click on related reports. This takes a while to run because worker is a very big business object. It will probably keep running for next 10-50 minutes. Right, when I go in here, if you see, it is giving me all the related reports for the worker or the employee business object. It gives me there are some 5,000 reports created for this business object. And then I can quickly click on them if I have access to them. If I don't have access to certain report, then it will be grayed out. Right, when I see this blue icon, it means I have access to that object. If I don't have access to certain object, then that object would be grayed out for me. For now, I can go in here. I want to know what is there in this report. Again, I can click on it. It will open me the report details or from the related actions. I can go ahead and run it or execute it. I can come in here. I can run this report. That is known as the contextual reporting. What is contextual reporting? It allows you to basically create and view related reports right directly from the context of an object. You have, for example, in this case, a worker opened. You can directly go in here and create reports from there or view related reports from there. Right, what is the advantage? It builds reports. When you know the data, you know that you have to build report on this data, but you don't know what is the context. You don't know what business objects have to be used, what data sources have to be used, and on and forth. There are three options. You can either create custom reports from here. You can view all related reports, something we saw. And then there is a third option, which is the report fields and values. This option displays all the report fields and values related to that specific view. Right. This is very helpful because this is how you can basically check. For example, you see this data and you can see where this value is coming from. It will give you those specific report fields as well as values. That way you can then build your reports because you know this data is coming from that specific field. Right? As I mentioned, I'm not running that because it will take forever. Exactly this way. Obviously, worker is a very big business object. It takes a lot of time to run. Just give me 1 second, guys. Any questions? Alright, that was the reporting basics. If there are no questions, let's talk about creating custom reports. Now, in order to understand how custom reports are created, we need to understand the Workday object model. What is Workday object model? Now for creating any report. The most important aspect, if I go in here and I create a custom report. Right, because it's asking me something for a data source. I think you guys are already aware of a data source. Can someone tell me what is a data source or what is a business object? Any have you come across this term already? Not sure about the business object, but it could be a place or any place within any connection from which we can retrieve data, right? It can be a standard report, or it can be a web service or database or anything for that matter. Any place where we can get a data, right? That connection would be a resource, correct? Thank you for that answer. In order to understand data source, we would first talk about business object. What is a business object? Now, when I was looking at the worker profile, right, I had a worker opened and I said we could go ahead and create a report from there. In Workday, all data is organized in terms of business object. What is a business object? A worker, for example, is a business object. A report in Workday is a business object. A position in Workday is a business object. You spoke about organizations in your session, I believe last week, right? Supervisory OX cost centers companies, each one of these are business objects. In Workday, all data is grouped in terms of business objects. Now, if you have learned, maybe in your engineering or in your college, I'm sure you would have come across this term called OOPs, right? Object-oriented programming. Workday is a completely object-based language or tool wherein all data or everything is represented in terms of an object. Now an object has some key components. An object has a set of attributes. If I talk about worker as an example, worker has a set of attributes. What are the attributes of a worker? A worker would have a name, a worker would have a date of birth, a worker would have a hire date, worker may have a termination date. If the worker is terminated, the worker would be occupying a position, they would be reporting to a manager, and on and forth. Each worker has a set of attributes. Right. Then there are instances of worker. You have this work business object called worker that Workday has delivered. Now I have 10,000 workers in my organization or 10,000 employees in my organization. Each of these employees is an instance of the worker business object. Right. Similarly, organization is a business object and I have maybe 500 supervisory orgs in my organization. Right. Each supervisory org is an instance of the supervisory organization business object. Business object is a template which defines what attributes can be associated with that business object. And then, when you use Workday's system, you create instances of that business object. Let me open an Excel. Right. Workday. Workday has delivered this business object called worker, and it has also configured that a worker business object would have a number of attributes. It would have last name, first name, later birth, gender, on and forth position, manager, and on and forth. Right. Now, when you use Workday system, you have implemented Workday. Now you use Workday system, you actually create instances of worker business object. Every employee you hire in the system is an instance of the worker business object. You have your first employee, his last name is O, his first name is P, last name is 1. Date of birth is some 1990. Gender is position is this person is a CEO and on and forth and doesn't have a manager. Similarly, you have another employee in your system P2. Right. Date of birth is some 1980, female, and she's a BP sales. Every employee you hire, you terminate as part of your daily transactions, you're creating or dealing with an instance of the worker business object, wherein you're defining the actual value for each of these attributes. Now, some of these would be required attributes. Every worker has to have a name, right? Or first name, last name, but not every worker has a manager. Some of these are required attributes, some of these are optional attributes. Similarly, if I talk about position now, there are 500 positions in my organization. A position would have a position title, the effective date, right? The status, whether that position is open, filled, closed, on and forth. The person who is occupying that position, on and forth. Now I have this position called CEO. On my position, one hostile, Dill is CEO. It is effective in my organization from 2001. Current status is open and this position is being occupied by Imam P1. Right? This, if you see, creates a relationship between different business objects. This instance of my worker, business object EMP1 is related to this instance of the position, business object. Right? Now these relationships could be one-to-one, which means this employee is occupying one position. This position is being occupied by one employee. Some of these instances are one-to-one. Some of these instances are one-to-many. For example, this employee has 5 dependents. There are 5 dependents that this employee has, and those dependents are part of a different business object. I have this dependent one who again would have maybe a name and dependent relationship and maybe gender. I have this dependent 1 and 2 and 3. They are all related to this employee called Imam P1. If you see, there is this one-to-many relationship between these two business objects. Right. All data in Workday is enabled or available to you in terms of these business objects. Workday stores all data in terms of business objects. Right? And you can think of these business objects as database tables. Right? Because that's exactly what it is. You can think of these business objects. You can think of these business objects as a database table with rows, right? And then with columns. Each business object has attributes. In Workday, we represent them as fields. If I go ahead and open any business object, how do I search for a business object using the prefix BO? For example, I want to search for a business object called allowance. This is this business object. I wanted to pick different one. Any which ways. This business object, it has 7 attributes in Workday. These attributes are represented as fields. And these are the fields that we use for Workday reporting, right? Each business object consists of a set of attributes. They are represented as fields. Right? This business object has 7 attributes. Some business objects, like worker, they may have thousands of attributes, and that's why I'm not opening that. It would take a lot of time to load. And then there is this interrelationship between business objects. When I click here, it shows me how this business object is related to different objects. This business object is related to worker BO, right? And I can navigate to that business object if I want to. Who has delivered this interrelationship and these business objects? It's Workday. Workday has delivered all these business objects. Workday has delivered these interrelationship. Can I go and change them? No, I cannot. Workday has already established which business object is related to which other business object, whether it is one-to-one, one-to-many relationship. What can we do? As part of using Workday, we create instances, but then we can also add fields. Each business object has Workday delivered attributes, Workday delivered fields, but we can't add our own custom fields or calculated fields. Workday, as an example, has delivered a standard attribute called hire date or date of birth for a worker. I can create any additional attributes. This business object called worker, as I mentioned, it has lots of attributes, 14,000. Now, if you see, some of these attributes are your own custom attributes that you have created, calculated. But then there are lots of Workday delivered attributes as well, which come pre-delivered along with your Workday tenant. And we'll look at those in detail. That is a business object. Now, when you create a report, you create it using your primary business object. The main business object that you select on your report is called the primary business object. Let's look at this is still running. I'll cancel this. Active employee details. We copied the standard report and created this report right. Excuse me. If I go to the report details, you'll see each report has a primary business object. It is this business object that is being used for getting the fields on your report. Right. Your report is basically a number of fields that you're trying to pull. and your primary business object is the object from which you are getting these fields. If it is from this primary business object that you're getting the employee ID, you're getting the hire date, you're getting the cost center, you're getting the location, and on and forth. But then in addition to primary business object, you can also get data from additional business objects, which are your related business objects. Now, this is not possible with a simple report. In a simple report, you can only get data from the primary business object. You cannot use any related business objects to get your data. And that's why, as I mentioned, we don't create simple reports. Right. Objects that are associated with your PBO. And as I mentioned, there can be one-to-one or one-to-many relationships. On your report, you want to get data from worker, which is your primary business object, but then you also want to get dependent details. This becomes your RBO-related business object. If you're building your report on dependents, then your dependents becomes your primary business object. And for each of those dependents, you want to also know the employee or certain aspect of employee that these are dependent for. Then your worker or your employee becomes your related business object. It all depends on what kind of report you want to get or what kind of data you want to get. Right? Workday has not defined that only this should be your primary business object. It's you. When you create your report, you identify what should be your PBO, what should be your RBO, and on and forth. Now, the next is the data source. Now, what is a data source? Data source is simply a filter. You have 50,000 employees in your organization. Now, each employee is a row. Now, when you're building a report, you don't want data for all 50,000 employees every time. Maybe you only want data for your active employees. You're building a report which gets you all active employees in your system. You want to build a report to only see terminated employees in your system. Right? These are your Workday delivered data sources. What is the data source? A data source, in its simplest way, is simply a filter. A Workday delivered filter. If I come here and look at this business object worker, it comes with a number of data sources. Again, Workday delivered. We cannot create any data sources. I want to get a report which only shows me retiree details because that's all I need. There are probably only 100 retirees out of Fazazid. Now, if I need to get data only for those 100 retirees, why should I get all 50,000 records loaded in my report? I'll use this data source. The advantage is your report performance. Whenever you're building a report, know what data you want to fetch and then use a data source which gets you the minimum number of all the records. Right. Maybe you want to get data for some 500 records for some criteria. Now there's no data source which will get you all exactly 500 records. Probably there's one data source called A, B, C, and I'm just giving an example. Right. There's no data source called A, B, C. With this data source, you can get maybe 10,000 out records. This another data source which is called DF. With this data source, you can get 1500 records. 1500 including all 500 that you want. Similarly, 1000 including all 500 that you want. Then, when you build your report, you'll use this data source because it gets you the minimum number of all the records that you want. Why would you do that? Because the lesser number of records that are being loaded into your report, the faster would be your report performance. And then you'll build additional custom filters to restrict your output only to these 500. Right? Your data source acts as that additional filter or the first filter. Every report has a data source. Now this report is getting you, if you see all active employees. Now let's say out of these all active employees, I only need those employees who are hired in 2022. Then I'll go ahead and build additional filters. If I don't do that, it will give me all active employees in the system. If I go to the data source details, it gives me additional description. If you see this data source, it's SSS or accesses employee as its primary business object. This data source is built on the employee BO and it returns one row for each employee. If there are 500 employees in your system, it will give you 500 rows in your report. But then it will only give you those employees who are currently active. If there are 1,000 employees, out of it only 500 are active, this data source will only give you 5,000 rows. It excludes terminated workers, employees who are going to be hired in future, any workers who are on leave and on and forth. Every data source gives you a description, and it's absolutely critical that you go through the description before making a decision which data source has to be used. Right. Again, accesses worker as its primary business object. It gives you one row for each worker record, and this data source includes both active as well as terminated workers. We have data sources which acts as your filters or your views. Right. All data sources are Workday delivered. And each data source is associated with one business object. A business object can have multiple data sources or no data sources as well. Right? But each data source is only associated with one business object. Now, what is a business object? A business object is a collection of fields. In Workday, we call them CRF or class report fields. It is these fields we reference when we create our reports. We select a BO which defines what fields are available. And then, based on our requirement, we use these fields when we create our custom reports. Cues, right? These fields are Workday delivered. But then, if we want, we can create our own calculated fields, and we'll see when we create our reports how these calculus are created. And then finally, we have also spoken about instances. These are like your rows in a table, right? Again, an object can have 0 instances. It can have one instance or it can have many instances. I don't have any dependents, right? In terms of my dependents or no, we don't store any dependents data in our system. There are 0 instances of dependents BO, right? It all depends on what kind of data you store or what kind of data a given object has. All right. For creating a report, we need to understand these aspects. The same information, if you see we have this business object, right? We have a business object called worker. Now each worker has a number of attributes. Each worker has a number of attributes. Right? And then we have a number of instances. Right. And then these are all your CRF class report field. First name, title, date of birth. Everything that you see here is a field. Your business object is very similar to your traditional report that you use in your relational databases, Oracle, on and forth. You can think of a business object as a table, right? A data source as a view or a filter. Your class report fields are your columns, right? Your title is a column, your date of birth is a column, your first name is a column, last name is a column. These are all columns. And then your instance is a row. Once again, in terms of business objects, we spoke about this interrelationship, right? There can be one-to-one, one-to-many relationship, and this is showing you the same information. Alright, in this case, if you see what do we have here? We have a data source called all active employees. This acts as a filter. It's a Workday delivered filter that you're using, and it will only get you those employees wherein this attribute is set. The active status of the employee is true. This data source is built on this business object called employee. And this business object has a number of fields. Each employee would have a last name. Right. Each employee would have a grade, right? I'm a manager. I'm a manager level 1 on and forth. Now, this is a single instance, right? I can only have one grade for a position, but then I can have one to many or zero to many dependents. That is a multi-instance. Right. While each person can only have one grade, right? A person can have multiple dependents or zero to multiple dependents, while an employee has a one-to-one relationship with a grade, an employee has one-to-many relationship with dependents. All right? The same information that you see here, this is how it is structured in Workday. Right? We have our employee business object. Right? Compensation grade is a related business object which you see on the RBO tab. Worker, if you see, has a one-to-one relationship. A worker, this icon that you see here, it identifies a single instance. All right. This identifies that it is a single instance. Whereas if you see dependence, dependence is a multi-instance. This icon that you see, this identifies a multi-instance. Let me quickly show this in tenant. Right. If I go to related business objects, all employees are workers. What is a worker? Worker is employees as well as contractors, contingent workers. All employees are workers, but not vice versa. If I search here and search for grade, alright, and I'll also search for dependents. And then if I filter, a worker business object is related to both dependents as well as grade. But with respect to dependent or compensation grade, it is usually a one-to-one relationship. These are all custom fields that people have created. The relationship is single instance. But with respect to dependence, it is one-to-many relationship. The most critical aspect when creating your reports for your report performance, something we just discussed, is your data source selection. It is your data source which determines how many rows get loaded into your report. Context. If you talk about workers, right? If you see, as I mentioned, all workers are dependents. What is a worker? Workers is your employees, your permanent employees, as well as your contractors, your contingent workers. Then you have all active and terminated workers. Your workers contain your active employees, your terminated employees, your retirees, your employees on leave, and on and forth. When I say leave those employees who are on long leave, they are not considered active in Workday, right? Then under that you have another data source called all active and terminated workers. And below that you have data source called all active employees. Now what does this signify? It signifies that if you want to build a report only for your employees, right? Not your contingent workers. In that case, instead of using this data source called all active workers or all active and terminated workers, you'll probably use this data source because it gives you the minimum number of records that you need. Right? Always choose your data source wisely because that would impact your report performance. Alright, now there are different types of data sources. If you go in here and you look at data source, there are, in fact, two types of data sources. One is a standard data source. And then if you scroll down, you also have index data sources. We just saw one here, right? If I come here, let me select all workers, then indexed all workers. While all workers is a standard data source, indexed all workers is an indexed data source. What is the difference? In terms of creating a report, there's no difference. But in terms of report performance, there is a significant difference. If you are building a report, see if there is an indexed data source which meets your requirement. If I look at this data source, it says this data source provides access to currently all active workers and workers with a future hire or contact date. If I'm building a report wherein I need all active workers in the system, then I'll use this data source because this is an indexed, which means it will give me an improved performance. You see, when I go to creating a report, I have this checkbox enabled called Optimized for Performance, and then it only gives me indexed data sources. When I uncheck this, I get a warning saying that this will allow you to select non-indexed data sources, and this may impact your report performance. Always see that is there an indexed data source available which can take care of your reporting requirement. If there is, go ahead and use that. But then that may not be the case every time. For some business object, maybe Workday has not delivered any indexed data source. Or for your reporting requirement, maybe there's no indexed data source available which can take care of that requirement. Then there are other types of data sources as well. For example, we have filtered data sources. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail. These are all standard. Broadly, your data sources are categorized as indexed and standard. But within standard, you have some additional data source types. For example, we can talk about focused data sources now, right? I want to build a report which will be available to managers. Maybe managers can see their team absence. If I'm a manager and there are 5 employees reporting to me, I should be able to see absence details of those 5 employees. Then I'll use this focused data source called my direct reports. When I use this data source, any manager who runs this report will only see details of those employees that they are manager for. If I scroll down right, this is the data source called my direct reports. And when a report is built using this data source, if someone runs that report will only give you those will only return those workers that person running that report manages. And the report only includes those workers who are associated with the supervisory org that the user manages. Right. We use this data source for creating reports which should be available to managers. Right? These are referred to as focused data sources. Again, consider why are we talking about this repeatedly? Because your report performance is absolutely critical. We'll talk about filter data sources when we look at reporting. Creating reports, consider or look at, is there any index data source available? If there is nothing available, see if there is any filter data source. See if you can use any focused data source. If not, then you'll use any data source which gives you all data. Any questions till now? Perfect. There are no questions. We can start creating our first set of reports. We will talk about advanced reports. Now we have already seen how do we create a report. Any report type I want to create, my task is create custom report. My task is create custom report. I'll select the report type and we want to create an advanced report. I'll give a report name and I'm calling it APMG worker details. Then I'll select the data source. This is where I'll see, is there an indexed data source available to take care of my requirements? If there is, I'll go ahead and use that. For now, I'll use this data source called all active and terminated workers. This is a standard data source. When I select a data source, as we mentioned, a data source is uniquely associated with the business object. When I click, this defaults the business object for me. Once your business object is selected, you cannot go ahead and change it. Right. You can still go ahead and change the data source. All business objects on worker data sources are still available because it's simply a filter. At any point in time, you can change your filter. But then your business object cannot be changed. What is the purpose of this business object? Because we have selected this business object, now all the fields which are available on this business object can be referenced in my report. The business object that you select, it determines what attributes can you pull into your report. I want to pull last name. This will give me the last name of the worker. Which worker? How many workers determined by the data source you select. Let me just run this. This is giving me 7,400 records. These are all the workers who are either currently active or terminated. If I go ahead and edit this report, I'm not sure why this is taking this long. I can come in here, edit my report. And I only want data for excuse me retirees. I am changing my data source. I will click on. Right. It's only giving me 10 records. Right. What are those 10 records? These are the people who are retirees. Now, why is this blank? There are probably some retirees whose data is either first or whose last name is not available for whatever reasons. Again, this is a test tenant. Now it only gives me 10 records. That's because there are only 10 retirees in the tenant. Alright. Now, when we are creating a report, as we discussed, we can reference or we can pull all fields from the primary business object. But then we can also get fields from the related business object. This is taking forever. My primary business object worker is related to compensation grade. It's also related to dependents. Right. And I want to see those details as well. I can come in here and instead of selecting my primary business object, I want to get data about compensation grade. I'll select my related view. Why is that I'm able to select it? Because worker is related to compensation grade. Why is the worker related to compensation grade? Because Workday has defined those relationships for us. Right? I can get all data from my PBO. But then from my PBO, I can get all the data, all the fields. But I can also select the business objects which are related to this primary business object and get fields from those related business objects. I can come in here. I have selected compensation grade, which now becomes RBO, a related business object. And here I can get details of the related business object. When I come here, if you see, it is getting me all the fields which are related to the RBO. I can see compensation grade. I can see compensation basis, the package that this grade is part of. When I go in here and click on all, if you see, it gives me a completely different set of fields. Or it would say there are lots of fields and we cannot display everything. Because in this column it is getting me this is what it says, there are too many results. Because it is fetching data from the worker business object which has almost 15,000 fields. But when I get here is fetching data from the RBO or it is fetching fields from the related business object which is compensation grade. How can I check the fields on the related business object? I can come in here. I can search for compensation grade. And then I can click on this and it will show me all the fields which are available on this business object. This business object called compensation grade, it has 155 fields. And I can access all of them here because I'm using that business object here. Right. Had I created this report using one of these data sources, there's just one. Right. For grade. If I had created my report using this data source called all compensation grades, then my compensation grade would have become the primary business object for my report. Right. The primary business object for your report depends on what data source you selected. And I could have still fetched data from worker, but then worker would have become my secondary business object or my related business object. When we say PBO and RBO, it is in the context of that specific report. In the context of this report, worker is my PBO and I'm using grade as my RBO. If I create another report, I can use grade as my PBO. PBOs and RBOs are in the context of the report that we are talking about. Similarly, we also know that worker is also related to dependents. I can also come in here and search for dependents. Right now, dependence is a multi-instance because each worker can have multiple dependents. But each worker can only have one. Compensation grade. No ID. Search for name. If that field exists, and this would give me, for example, if I take last name here, this will give me the name of the last name of the dependent. This is giving me the last name of the worker. This is giving me the last name of all the dependents that that worker is related to. Alright, what I'll do is I'll quickly add a filter. Don't worry about this. We'll talk about this in detail. The reason I'm adding this filter is that it only gives us relevant data that we can have. Check right now. I'm just saying only give me those records where an employee has some dependents. There's just one employee who has a dependent. And this is giving me the last name of that employee. Because this is a related business object, a multi-instance business object, that's why it is shown this way. Let me select a different RPU. You can get all data from your primary business object or all fields from your primary business object, but you can also get fields from your related business objects. Now fields can be of different type. If I come in here, my last name that I selected here, it is a field of type text. Even the last name of the dependent that I've selected is a field of type text. What is text? Text is plain text. If you look at the layout, you see while this is grayed out. When I click here, there is no related actions option. This is, on the other hand, highlighted. That's because this is not some plain text. This is an instance. Let me show you the difference. I will remove the filter. I will also remove. And I also add. Add, which is again. Let's run it. Now it's only giving me the retirees. That's fine. Now this is how. Or this is where you can see the difference. You see, I have added last name. I could have added another field called first name. It's giving me basically the same information, right? I see Kumar, and when I added worker, it's giving me the full name. Now, the difference is this is a text field, which means I cannot perform any actions on the screen on this field, whereas these are instance fields. What are instance fields? I can, for example, directly click on them and look at the details. This is an instance field for address, which means I can directly go in here and, for example, perform any related actions, or I can directly click here. I don't know why it doesn't. Let's click here. When I directly click there, it takes me to that instance details. Your instance is your dynamic data, whereas your text is your static value. This is your text business title, whereas this is an instance. And whenever you see an instance, you can actually perform any related action. For example, for this worker, based on my security access, I can perform any and all related actions. Alright, the basic type of field that you would be referencing in your report is a field of type text. And then we have some instance fields as well. We'll just look at them in a bit. We have in fact spoken about them, but I'll talk about those in a bit more detail. First, let's look at other types of fields as well. Now, in addition to text, we have other types of data or fields as well that we can pull. I'll click on plus icon. I want to get the hire date of the employee. A hire date is a field of type date. Whenever I see a field, it will show me the field icon. This icon P8 identifies that this is a field of type text. These are probably all custom fields that people have created, and people have created all sorts of data. If you see, these are those custom fields. This is a work data delivered field. I know that because I can see that here. This is a field of type date. And a field of type date has this icon, calendar icon. It shows me the date values, right? No. Then we have a few other field types as well. I can use a field of type number or numeric. Age is a numeric field, and it is identified with this hash symbol. And I click here. Tells me that this is a numeric field. Again, a work data delivered field. In addition to numeric, I can also add fields of type currency. Base. What is a currency field? A currency field is also a numeric field with an additional currency component or the currency symbol component. A currency field is identified by this dollar symbol. I'm adding. If I come in here, this is a field of type currency. Now, how is a currency field different from numeric field? A currency field has two components. The first one is the numeric value. If I'm pulling the total salary of an employee, it would be a number 10,000, but then there is also the currency code component. When I say the employee salary is $10, I'll also be specifying whether it is $1,000 or 10,000 rupees or any other currency. Currency field is a combination of two components. It is the numeric value plus the currency code. Which means if I come to options here and look at the options, you'll see there is an option to show currency symbol. But if I go to a numeric field, I'll not have that option because a numeric field doesn't have that additional currency component. There's no option to show currency symbol because this is a numeric field. This will make sense when we run this report, and let's do that. I think we should be changing the filter. Let's change the data source the next time. But this is a field of type text. This is a field of type date. This is a field of type numeric. This is a currency field, and in this field we also showed the currency symbol, which is optional, right? I could have just shown the value. The reason this symbol is showing is because I went to those additional options and I selected the option show currency symbol. We have fields of type text. We have fields of type date. We have numeric currency. Then there's another field which is called Boolean. What is Boolean? Boolean is simply yes or no. For example, I can add a field called is this person a manager? If the person is a manager, that field would simply show me yes. If not, it will show me blank or no. Let's change the data source. And I am adding one more field. It is identified by this icon called P/F true false. This is a field of type Boolean. And if identifies it is the person a manager. If this is a manager, the field will simply return yes. If not, it will return no. That is a Boolean. In the context of Workday, a blank is a no. Right. Because Logan Vineal is a manager, it returns yes. Maximilian Schneider is not a manager. It simply returns a blank value. Right? Now, in terms of instances, we already know we have something called single instance. Each worker would have only one composition grade. And this is not some plain text. This is an instance, which means I can go to the related actions and perform related actions. Or I can directly click on it and it will take me to the grade details. Each worker can have one or multiple addresses. This is how I see multi-instance data because Oliver has two address details. I see multiple instances here. Right? This is a multi-instance field. And then we also have something called self-referencing instance. Worker, here is a self-referencing instance. There's no difference in terms of how we use these fields on the report. Now, when you look at worker, you see this icon. And when I click on the related actions, it tells me this is a self-referencing instance. What do we mean by self-referencing instance? It simply means that this is a field which identifies a specific worker on the worker business object. When I come here, if you see, this is my worker business object, which consists of n number of workers. This is my worker 1, which is Imam P1. His last name is Imam P, first name is 1. This is my worker 2, Imam P2. This is a specific field which identifies an instance of the worker business object itself. And that's why it's called a self-referencing instance. Does it matter for me when I'm using it on the report? No, it doesn't. Right? It simply means that this field identifies a specific worker on the worker business object. And that's why if you see, this field has the business object called worker and the related business object called worker. Now, this is a bit different from what you see on this field. This is also self-referencing instance because we have used this field from the compensation grade business object. But if I go ahead and edit this report, instead of adding compensation grade here and then getting the compensation grade values, what I could have also done is I could have simply searched for compensation grade here. Now, this is where you will see the difference. Now, this is a field. This identifies the compensation grade associated with the worker. In the context of the worker business object, this is a single instance because this field links a worker to the compensation grade that the worker belongs to. Right. In the context of worker, this is a single instance. This is how it looks like in the context of this Imam P1. A CEO is the position that this Imam P1 occupies. This employee instance is related to this position instance. In the context of worker business object, this is a single instance field. But if I come to the position business object itself, then CEO is a self-referencing instance because here I'm talking about a field which identifies a specific position on the position business object. There's no difference, right? It is only in the context that I'm trying to get this data. In the context of this employee, he is related to a specific instance of a position. This is one-to-one relationship, and that's why we call it a single instance. But when I come here on the position business object itself, it identifies a specific position. Right. Here I see that this field links a worker to a compensation grade. for a worker. This is a one-to-one relationship here because I'm fetching the same data on the compensation grade. Business object basically links a compensation grade to compensation grade. It is a self-referencing instance. Is there any difference in the data when I run it? You'll see it will get me exactly same results. Right. It's getting the same data. The only difference is here I'm going one level below and I'm pulling this field specifically from that business object. That's the only difference. There's no difference as such between a self-referencing instance and a single instance. Right? Your primary object is your self-referencing instance. We looked at the different field types. Let's talk about filters a bit. We'll circle back fields and we'll look at how we create calculated fields. Before we do that, let's look at the reports. Currently, this report fetches me some 7,000 records, and these are basically being fetched based on the data source I selected. On top of this, I can go ahead and add additional filters. I only want male workers, right? I only want workers in a specific location, maybe US. I only want workers in a specific company or any of those criteria. I can go ahead and build additional filters on my report. I want to add a filter to only get those employees who are hired. Let's say in 2020, or who are hired on a specific date. In my filter, I have a number of fields. The first one is a number of columns. The first column of interest for us is this one field. This is where we enter the field based on which we want to define our filter criteria. I only want male employees. My filter criteria is gender. Right? I'll come in here and I'll search for gender. And I'll say gender. I'm selecting this field because this is an instance field, right? And I know this is what I need. The best thing to do when you get multiple fields, either here or when you are adding them to the report, it's not usually apparent. I didn't select this one because I saw this and I knew this is a true-false field. I knew this is a calculated field. Or even if this is not a calculated field, I know that with respect to gender, I at least don't want yes or no, and this is what this field will return. If I go in there, if you see, this is some calculated field someone has created for some logic and will not get into those details now. I knew that this is not the relevant field. And then there are other fields as well. You want to understand what that field is, you can click here and this will give you the field details. And then you can decide what field has to be used. This is the criteria based on which you want to define your filter logic. I'm saying gender. Now I want those employees whose gender is maybe male or female or whatever. The next is in the selection list. This is where I select the operator. If I go in here I want all employees who, let's say, are male or maybe female. I'll say select those employees whose gender is defined in the selection list. Which selection list? When I go in here, it will show me all the genders that have been configured in the tenant. There are quite a few genders. Again, this is a test tenant. People have created all sorts of data. But for my purpose, I want only those employees, let's say, who are either male or female. When I select multiple values, this acts as my OR condition. This will get me all employees whose gender is either male or female. Maybe I want all employees except for male and female. Then instead of in the selection list, I would have selected not in the selection list. The operator that you select depends on what you want to achieve. I could have said there were two options. I could have said in the selection list, and I could have selected everything except for male and female. I want every employee who is either not male or female, or who identifies himself or herself with any gender other than male and female. There were two options available. And I'm telling this just to let you know there's no right way. I could have selected everything except for male and female. That would have been correct. Or the other option would have been I could have gone in here. Now you would have selected instead of saying in the selection list, and I could have said not in the selection list. And here I would then have still selected male and female. This will give me all the employees whose gender is either not male or female. Both would still give me right data or the same data. But when selecting anything on a report, whether it is a field or a filter criteria, always consider which one is more optimized. In terms of a filter, you'll select those criteria wherein there is a minimum number of comparison. Here, if you see this is much more optimized, your Workday simply checks is this person's gender not male, not female. Had I selected in the selection list and selected those 5, 6 values, that would have been less efficient. Right? Because now Workday would have compared gender to those 6 values. Here it's just checking whether the gender is not male or not female. The comparison is restricted to 2 values. This in terms of output, both are correct. But in terms of what is optimized, this is the more optimized way, not in the selection list, male and female, instead of saying in the selection list and selecting those 5 values or 10 values or whatever. And now it is giving me all workers who are, it only gets me 1000 records. Probably there are quite a few records who have the gender as blank. They have not entered anything. Now the records have come down from 7000 odd to just 1000. This is how we can build additional filters. I want all males and females whose hire date is, let's say, 2022. In addition to my gender criteria, I want to build some additional filters. I'll go back. I'll go back to filter. I'll click on plus. And I'll say I want to take all males and females who are hired in 2022. Again, it returns me a lot of results. I know these are not relevant because hire date should be a field of type date. I would quickly discredit all of these, but these two looks relevant because they are both date fields. I cannot decide. I'll go into the details and I know this is the right one. This is a Workday delivered field. This is what it identifies. I'll not go and check the other one because I can see this is what is relevant. Now the operator depends on the field type because this was in a field of type instance. The operators that you saw were in the selection list, not in. The selection list is blank, not blank, and on and forth. But because this is a field of type date, when I go in, you'll see a different set of operators. The operators that you see here is blank is not blank, greater than less than equal to, not equal to, and on and forth. I want all employees who are hired in 2022. Right? I'm saying greater than or equal to. And the comparison value always shows based on the field type you selected and the operator that you selected. Because this is a field of type date, it allows me to enter a date value. Both your operators as well as comparison values are shown based on the type of field that you selected. I want all employees hired in 2022. My criteria is hired at greater than or equal to T22. I could have built. Once 2023 comes, this report will now start getting me all employees whose hire date is greater than 22, which means it will also get me employees hired in 2023. Now, how do I avoid that? I can add another field again saying and if you see, these are all and criteria. Workday is getting me the results which match all the filters that I have defined here. Whose gender is male or female and whose hire date is greater than 1st of Jan 2022. But in order to make it foolproof, I'm adding another field or another filter criteria saying an hire date is less than or equal to December 31, 2022. This will ensure that once 2023 comes, it doesn't show me details for 2023. You can add multiple criteria here. Let's first run this and then we'll talk about a few other options here. Now it gets me. Now it only gets me to 200 records. And I know this is right data because when I look at the hire date, every employee is hired in 2022. All right. Let's say I have a different requirement. I want all employees who are either male or female, which is our first filter criteria that we have already defined, or who are hired in 2022. The employee should either be male or female, or they should be hired in 2022. Right. Instead of saying, and I'll say, all right, because either of these should be true. Or their hire should be in the state range. I'll go ahead and now add brackets. Now, what they would evaluate is the employee's gender, male or female. If it is true, then what? They would get me the results. If the employee is not male or female, if this condition fails, still system would check, is there higher date between the state range? And because there is an or between these two, if anyone is true, they would get me results. And true or false gets me true. We would have learned this as part of our probably engineering time. True or false would get me true. True. False or false will get me false. Because this is an or condition, it would get me results if either of these criteria are true. This is how I can use or with brackets to design any kind of filter logic I want. Now when I run this report, it will get me most probably extra values. Now it gets me 300 records. When the person's gender is defined, then it gets me data from any year. Because my requirement is the person should be male or female, or if the person is not male or female, then they should only be from 2022. Right? We should have probably added the gender field as well. That would have. I can come in here, update my report. This person, if I go to this person is being fetched from 2022, which means if I would be blank or definitely not male or female. Because we have put an or condition right. It's getting either the person should be male or female or they should be born in 2022. If the person is not male and female, we should definitely add the gender field. That way we can evaluate our results. Now, the problem with the filters that we have added. Do you see any problem with the filters that we have added? Is it restrictive? Let's add the gender column as well. That way, it will be easy for us to evaluate our results. This tenant is extremely slow. Now we can check our results, but the problem with the filters that I have defined is that if you see, every time we run this report, it will always get data for 2022. Now, if we share this report with end users, maybe our HR team, they would want a bit more flexibility, right? They'll probably want to get data based on, maybe they want to get data for 2000 or 2021 or any other year. But this report doesn't give them that flexibility. Right? Now, how do we provide them with that flexibility? Here, if you see the comparison type, the default comparison type is value specified in this filter. We selected hire date, we selected operator as greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, and then we added comparison value when right. When we clicked here, we had this option to add a date, but maybe I want this date to be dynamically determined. Whenever we are running this report, we want all employees hired till that date to be automatically fetched. If we run this report in January 2023, we want this report to automatically get data as of that day from 1st of Jan 2022. In that case, instead of using this default comparison type, which is value specified in this filter, I would want to use a different comparison type. If I go to common, I have a couple of others. Let's first take this one. The moment I select value from another field, if you see, my field layout changes. Now I can no longer select it. Here instead, I can enter a field which would be used to calculate this hire date. I'm using a field called today. Now, if I go to this field, this is again a Workday delivered field, and it dynamically determines the system date or the today's date. If I'm running this report today, it will get me today's date. Now, instead of comparing my hire date with a static field of 12th December 2022, what I'm seeing is get me all the results of employees whose hire date is less than or equal to today's date. I want to check what is there in this today. This is a very good debugging tool, similar to how we added gender, right? I want to quickly check what is that we have there. I can add that field to the report layout. That way I'll know what data is coming and I can debug it. I can test it. I can check it. And before delivering the report, of course, we don't want to use today, right? We don't want this to be displayed. I'll remove that before I hand it over to my end user. But when I'm building my report, I would use these simple tips and tricks to quickly debug and check my report output. You see, it's getting me 11/28. Today always is the system date, which means in the filter it is checking all employees whose hire date is from 1st of Jan 2022 to today's date. And this will keep dynamically updating based on when the report is being run. And then if you see, wherever the gender is not male or female, the hire date would always be 2022. If it is male or female, then it can be any date because that's how we have created our filter. We have said either they should be male or female or they should be hired in 2022. If the gender is not male or female, the hire date would always be 2022. If that's not the case, then we know we have not created our filters properly. Right. And then we'll check our filters and then see what is the issue. That's how you would check your report output. Now you can see wherever the gender is other than male or female, the hire date would always be 2022. If that's not the case, that means your filter is incorrect because that's what you have created in this case. All right? Any questions? we have looked at two levels of filters. The first one is value specified in this filter, wherein we can specify a static value. And the second one is value from another field, wherein we can compare one field with another field in which data would be dynamically determined. Right? The type of comparison you use depends on what you are actually trying to achieve. But still, my filter is much better now, but still it is very restrictive. It still doesn't give users option to run this report for a specific time period. Maybe one of my HR wants to get all employees hired on May of 2019. And with this report, they still cannot do this. How can I make this report that much more flexible? If you look at the comparison type, there is a third comparison type as well, which is prompt the user for value. Now, this is what allows the end user to enter the value when they are running this report. For both these, I'm saying prompt the user for value. My end user would be prompted for hire date. They should be prompted for two dates. In first date, they enter the start range. In the second date, they enter the end range, and then it will get you data. Now, the only catch is if you are using a single field. For example, we are prompting hire date to end user twice. You just have to ensure that the comparison value you select is not the same. The moment I select it from the user for value will be defaulted this default prompt. Now the problem with that is let me run this report. What I'm expecting is user should be prompted to a date range, but if the user only gets one date, right? Whenever you're prompting a field to the user more than once, then you just have to ensure yes, could you repeat that? I'm repeating that. Let this. Now, what I actually expected was that I would be getting hire date twice. In the first hire date, I can enter the starting range, maybe 1st of May 2021, and then I can enter 31st of May 2021 if I want to get data for 1 month. But when I ran this report, it only gave me one hire date option. And the reason is, as I mentioned, if you're prompting a field more than once, which is what we are doing, we are prompting hire date twice to the end user. We are saying hire date greater than or equal to prompt the user for value, hire date less than or equal to prompt the user for value. But when we ran this report, it only gave us one hire date option instead of two, which we would have expected. In that case, all you have to do is in the comparison value where Workday defaulted, default prompt. Just go in here and select a different value. It doesn't matter what you select. You just have to ensure that both these prompts are different or not unique. In this case, I'll say starting prompt and I can just run it now. But just for the purpose of that symmetry, I'll come in here and I'll say ending prompt. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter what you select. These are all Workday delivered values. And it really doesn't matter what you select here. You just have to ensure if the same field is being prompted more than once in the comparison value, you have to ensure that they are not unique. Now, when I run this report, if you see, I get two hire dates. This is my starting hire date. I want to run this report for May, as I mentioned. I want to run this for May 1st, 2022. Let's say till May 30th, 2022 or any date range. When I run this report now, it will get me all employees hired in that date range or who are male and female. Because that's what I've selected in terms of mine. It will get me all employees who are either male or female or who are hired in 2022. Here I can see the criteria for which I'm getting the result. Let me change the filter and remove that or condition. That way we can see what is actually happening. I'll put an and condition. Or I'll probably remove that gender field altogether. That way we'll be able to test this. We don't need today anymore. And in filter, I'm removing this condition, gender. I'll change it back to, and these brackets parentheses no longer matter. Now, when I run this report and select a specific date range, not sure if there is any data for 2022. But if there is data, it will only get me those employees who are hired in that date range. It gets me 94 workers, all of whom are hired in May of 22. Please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.